perfectly ordinary day shattered. It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon in Atlanta, one of those golden, warm days when the sun shines just a little brighter, and everything seems to be in perfect order. Michael Carter had worked hard his entire life, 15 years of service as a police officer, long overtime shifts, and years of sacrifices. Finally, his efforts paid off. He bought his dream home, a beautiful, two-story house with a sparkling, crystal-clear swimming pool that shimmered under the Georgia sun. It was everything he'd hoped for. For once, life seemed perfect. But as Michael lay back in his lounge chair, eyes closed and basking in the tranquility, something shattered his peace. The shrill sound of sirens broke through the serenity, and 2 police cars came to an abrupt stop in front of his house. Officers, hands on their holsters, made their way toward his property. Michael's peaceful afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn. "Sir, we've received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in this pool area." The words hung in the air. Michael knew exactly who made that call. The same woman who had made his life a living nightmare for weeks, his neighbor, Karen Thompson. You might think this story sounds like the beginning of a typical neighborhood drama, but hold on, because it's far from ordinary. This was the beginning of a series of events that would escalate into one of the most satisfying, yet hilarious, acts of karma you'll ever hear about. But before diving into the details, let's rewind a bit. 2 months earlier, Michael had just moved into his dream house. After spending years protecting and serving his community as a police officer, he had finally earned the life he'd always wanted. The house, with its well-maintained backyard, was the icing on the cake. The pool was his personal slice of paradise, a place to unwind, enjoy the sun, and forget about the world. It wasn't long before Michael noticed Karen. It wasn't her physical presence that stood out, but rather her watchful eyes, constantly peering through her curtains, observing him. The first time he saw her, she was standing in her second-floor window, phone pressed to her ear, staring intently at him as he arranged furniture on his patio. Michael waved politely, but she quickly disappeared behind the curtains. At first, he thought little of it. After all, new neighbors always tend to be a little curious. But then, things started to get strange. One day, while Michael was away at the hardware store, his security camera pinged a notification alerting him of movement at his back gate. He checked the footage and was stunned to see Karen, dressed in a luxury swimsuit, casually walking through his unlocked gate and lounging by his pool. When he confronted her, her response was a mix of feigned surprise and arrogance. "I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy," she said with a smug smile. "The previous owners always let me use the pool." But it wasn't her audacity that struck Michael the most. It was the condescending, dismissive tone in her voice. She assumed she could just waltz into his backyard and take what she wanted. This wasn't just about a neighbor overstepping boundaries. This was a pattern of entitlement, a woman who believed the rules didn't apply to her. What followed was a series of increasingly outrageous incidents that would escalate the tension between Michael and Karen. What should have been an idyllic life in his new home soon turned into a daily battle for his privacy and peace. But here's where it gets really interesting. You see, what Karen didn't know was that Michael wasn't your average neighbor. He had spent over a decade as a police officer, and he wasn't one to let things slide. As the situation worsened, Michael knew he had to get smart. But sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully isn't to fight fire with fire. It's to let karma take its course with a little twist. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could a simple neighbor dispute escalate into something so big? Trust me, this is no ordinary petty neighborhood drama. As the story unfolds, you'll see how Michael, using his years of law enforcement experience, laid a trap that turned the tables in the most spectacular way possible. Stay with me, because this is just the beginning of a truly unforgettable story. A story where the rule of law, patience, and a dash of cleverness would be the ultimate tools for sweet, satisfying karma. So, how did Michael's life change after Karen's trespassing attempts? And more importantly, what happened when he decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget? Let's dive deeper into this jaw-dropping story, filled with twists, turns, and a bit of unexpected green, a test of patience, law, and cleverness. Now that we've set the stage with Michael's seemingly perfect life and Karen's unwelcome intrusion, let's dive into the twists and turns that led to the explosive climax of this story. Buckle up, because what follows is a roller coaster ride of tension, clever maneuvering, and some good old-fashioned karma. Chapter 1: The Line in the Sand. After Karen's first bold trespass into Michael's backyard, he didn't let it slide. Sure, Michael had always prided himself on being a laid-back, easygoing guy. After all, as a police officer, he had seen it all: theft, violence, even murder. But this was personal. No one had the right to invade his privacy, let alone use his property as if it were their own. Michael wasn't about to allow a petty neighbor dispute to spiral into something worse. He needed to make his stance clear, but in a way that would leave Karen with no excuses. So what did he do? He called Karen over for a friendly chat. On the surface, this seemed like the type of neighborly gesture anyone would appreciate. But for Michael, it was a calculated move. He knew that a polite conversation would show Karen that he was serious without escalating the conflict too quickly. At this point, he hadn't yet called the police, but he was ready to do so if things went any further. Michael, standing at his front door, waved her over with a warm but firm smile. When Karen approached, Michael greeted her with what seemed like an inviting tone. "Karen, I wanted to talk about what happened the other day. It's really important that we respect each other's boundaries here." Karen, as expected, didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with her behavior. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she replied, "Oh, Michael, come on. I've been living here for years. The last owners didn't mind, and I didn't think you would either. It's just a pool, no big deal." Her response, however, was a textbook example of entitlement. She didn't understand that Michael had worked too hard to let her take what she wanted without consequences. Michael, however, was calm and collected. He wasn't going to lose his temper, not yet. Instead, he let her ramble on, observing her every word, and waited for the perfect moment to deliver his response. "I understand your perspective," Michael said coolly, "but I've got a family here, and we've worked really hard for what we have. I just need you to respect our space." The conversation ended with Karen half-heartedly agreeing, but Michael wasn't convinced. He knew that someone who dismissed boundaries so easily wasn't going to change without consequences. Little did Karen know, Michael had already begun putting his plan into motion. Chapter 2: The Trap is Set. Karen's response to Michael's polite request confirmed everything he needed to know. She didn't take him seriously. So, Michael decided it was time to put his law enforcement skills to work. If she wouldn't respect his boundaries, he would find a way to make her respect the law. Here's where things took a clever twist. Michael, aware of Karen's persistent intrusions, decided to turn the tables. Rather than call the police immediately, he opted to set a legal trap. After all, he had the advantage. He knew the law better than most, and he wasn't about to let someone walk all over him. Michael made a call to his friend, Detective Sarah Williams, who worked in the local precinct. He explained the situation, and Sarah agreed to help him out. The plan was simple. Michael would stage a few coincidental encounters, capturing them on his security cameras, and later present the evidence to the authorities. The aim? To prove that Karen's behavior was not just an annoyance, it was harassment. Over the next few weeks, Michael began executing his plan. First, he left his gate slightly ajar, just enough for Karen to notice. Sure enough, she couldn't resist. One afternoon, as expected, Michael saw her wander into his backyard again, lounging by the pool as if she were at her own home. This time, however, the cameras caught everything. It was the perfect setup. Michael called his friend Detective Williams, who advised him on the best way to handle things from a legal standpoint. Chapter 3: The Moment of Truth. The stage was set, and Michael was finally ready to take action. He had the footage. He had the evidence. He had the law on his side. Now it was time to confront Karen in a way that would leave no room for excuses. On one fateful evening, after Karen had once again trespassed on Michael's property, he called her over. This time, there was no pretense of politeness. Michael wasn't interested in playing nice anymore. As Karen approached, Michael didn't waste time with small talk. "Karen, I have something I want to show you," he said, leading her toward his living room, where he had pulled up the footage on his large flat-screen TV. The look on Karen's face as she saw herself lounging by his pool on camera was priceless. She sputtered, trying to come up with an excuse, but Michael wasn't having it. "You see, Karen, what you're doing isn't just rude, it's illegal. And now I have all the proof I need." The shock on her face was visible. For the first time, Karen realized that she had overstepped in ways she hadn't anticipated. Michael didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. The cold, hard evidence was all that was required. Chapter 4. The Twist, a Lesson in Karma. But here's where the story takes a delightful turn. Karen, faced with the evidence, had no choice but to back down. The police were called, and she was officially warned about her actions. Michael could have left it at that. After all, justice had been served. But as fate would have it, the universe had one more twist in store. A few days later, Michael was enjoying a quiet evening on his porch when he saw Karen's car pull up again. But this time, she wasn't coming to his house. Instead, she walked over to the neighbor's property and, standing on the sidewalk, began shouting at the new owners. "You'll regret moving in here," she yelled, shaking her fist. "I warned you about that Michael guy. He's a troublemaker." At that moment, Michael realized something incredible. Karen hadn't just learned her lesson. She had learned nothing at all. Her sense of entitlement had only deepened. But this time, the neighborhood was watching. The balance of power had shifted. Now, Michael's victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a moral triumph. He had defended his privacy, his property, and his peace of mind, and in doing so, he had shown everyone that sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to be patient, play it smart, and let karma take care of the rest. The aftermath, lessons learned, and the power of patience. The saga between Michael and Karen had reached its climax. But the real work was only beginning. What followed in the aftermath of Michael's triumph was a series of lessons that not only affected the two characters at the heart of the story, but also revealed deeper truths about human nature, entitlement, and the sometimes unseen consequences of our actions. Chapter 1. The Consequences of Entitlement. Karen had learned the hard way that her sense of entitlement and disregard for other people's boundaries were not without consequences. However, this was a lesson she wasn't willing to learn completely. Even after the legal confrontation, Karen didn't change her ways. Instead, she doubled down on her belief that she was somehow above the rules. But as Michael knew all too well, her behavior was bound to have ripple effects far beyond their neighborhood. At first, it seemed like Karen might lay low, scared off by the police warning and the evidence Michael had collected. But in reality, she couldn't help but test the limits again. She began spreading rumors about Michael to the other neighbors, casting him as the antagonist in a story where, ironically, she was the victim. She painted herself as the misunderstood one, trying to downplay her trespassing as innocent curiosity rather than a violation of Michael's rights. Michael, however, was prepared. While it was tempting to let the rumors fly, he understood that the best way to deal with this was to stay calm and above it all. He didn't retaliate. He didn't yell or engage in petty squabbles. Instead, he kept his distance from Karen and her drama, focusing on his family and his life. What he realized, though, was that Karen's continued actions weren't just her own problem. They were a reflection of a larger issue in the world. In a world where people often feel entitled to everything around them, from material goods to other people's time, boundaries are often seen as obstacles to personal freedom. But in reality, respecting those boundaries is what keeps society functioning smoothly. And this situation was a reminder of the importance of understanding the power dynamics at play when someone repeatedly oversteps those boundaries. Karen's lack of remorse and her continuous attempts to paint herself as the victim only served to alienate the neighbors further. Michael, by contrast, emerged as the rational one, the one who didn't act out of frustration or emotion. He let his actions speak for themselves. Chapter 2. The Ripple Effect. Neighbors take sides. While Michael was determined to keep things peaceful, the ongoing tension between Karen and him didn't go unnoticed. The entire neighborhood had witnessed the fallout from this confrontation, and slowly but surely the power dynamics shifted. Some of the neighbors, who had initially sided with Karen, began to see through her facade. They started questioning her motivations, especially when they noticed her continued attempts to manipulate the situation. Michael, on the other hand, remained a figure of consistency. He didn't engage in gossip, and he didn't escalate things further. His quiet, unwavering stance on the matter made him the quiet hero of the neighborhood. It was during a neighborhood meeting that the tide turned. Karen showed up, hoping to rally support for her cause, but instead, she found herself increasingly isolated. Michael didn't need to say a word. His calm demeanor and thoughtful actions spoke volumes. Others began to quietly express their concerns about Karen's behavior, which, over time, made her appear more and more like the antagonist in this neighborhood drama. This is a powerful reminder of how, sometimes, the loudest voices don't win. The more Karen pushed, the more people saw her for what she was, someone who refused to take responsibility for her actions. In contrast, Michael's silence and measured response allowed the truth to slowly emerge. Chapter 3: The Silent Strength of Patience. Looking back on this entire ordeal, it's clear that one of the most significant lessons learned was the power of patience. Michael's response wasn't fueled by anger, fear, or retaliation. Instead, he took a step back, observed the situation, and strategically placed his trust in the law and his own calm demeanor. It would have been easy for him to confront Karen the moment she trespassed, to escalate things by yelling or calling the police too soon. But by waiting and gathering evidence, he made sure that when he did take action, it was both justified and irrefutable. This approach is a prime example of how patience, when coupled with clear thinking, can often be more effective than reacting in the heat of the moment. It's a tactic that applies not just to neighbor disputes, but to many of life's challenges. Whether in personal relationships, business, or even in moments of emotional conflict, taking a step back and giving yourself time to process and act thoughtfully can often lead to better outcomes than impulsive decisions. Chapter 4: The Long-Term Impact on Michael and Karen. As the months passed, Michael's reputation in the neighborhood only grew. He wasn't just known as the guy who stood up for his rights. He was seen as the man who didn't let petty drama and conflict consume him. His family, too, benefited from the peace he worked so hard to preserve. No longer was Michael's household troubled by Karen's antics. Instead, he was able to focus on the things that mattered most to him: his career, his family, and his peace of mind. For Karen, however, things didn't go as smoothly. Her reputation continued to take a hit, and she became more isolated from the community. The very thing she had hoped to avoid, being labeled as the troublemaker, became her reality. The relationships she had once relied on began to crumble, and eventually, she was forced to move away, unable to maintain the web of lies she had spun for so long. In many ways, Michael's victory wasn't just about asserting his right to privacy. It was about demonstrating that integrity, patience, and staying true to one's principles could ultimately outshine any conflict, no matter how frustrating. Karen's story, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale about entitlement, manipulation, and the cost of ignoring the boundaries of others. What we can all learn. As we reflect on the story of Michael and Karen, there are several key lessons we can take away. First, it's essential to understand that boundaries exist for a reason. Whether in our personal lives, our work environments, or our relationships with others, respecting the space and privacy of those around us is crucial for maintaining healthy, functioning relationships. Second, patience is not just a virtue, it's a strategic advantage. Michael's ability to step back, assess the situation, and wait for the right moment to act was what ultimately led to his success. In a world that often values speed and immediate reactions, Michael's approach teaches us that sometimes, taking a moment to reflect can yield the best results. Finally, the story of Karen shows us the dangers of entitlement and how, in the end, such behavior rarely leads to positive outcomes. While she might have temporarily succeeded in manipulating the situation, her actions only caught up with her in the long run. In the end, Michael's story is a reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. And as for Karen, well, her story serves as a warning about the power of entitlement, the consequences of overstepping boundaries, and the inevitable fallout when we fail to learn from our mistakes. Reflection and final thought. In every confrontation, big or small, we all have choices. We can act impulsively, or we can act with patience and purpose. We can engage in conflict, or we can let our actions speak louder than words. Michael chose the latter, and in doing so, he not only protected his home but also earned the respect of his community. The lesson? Sometimes, the best way to win is by staying calm, standing your ground, and letting life take its course. Because in the end, patience and integrity always find a way to triumph.